water and die dehydrated. Because the more salt you take into your system, the more the red blood cells, by a process of reverse osmosis, pass the little bit of water that those red blood cells have into the circulatory system to diminish the saltiness of your blood system. And so you die dehydrated, bloated with water. What does that story have to do with the Song of Solomon? We live in days when people are trying to quench their sexual thirst by drinking polluted, salty water. Practices such as pornography, which create addictions, which require more and more and more to satisfy that desire, ultimately lead to sexual bloating and dehydration. More and more leads to less and less. The waters that people are drinking are polluted. They are filled with disease. And yet the enemy continues to convince us to drink more and more and die a slow and painful death. But it's so refreshing when we come to the book of the Song of Songs and discover that God's crystalline, pure waters can satisfy the thirst that He Himself gave us in a pure, healthy, cleansing way. When we come to this part of the book of Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 8 all the way through the wedding day, chapter 5, verse 1, we discover this message of the purity of boundless love. You know that when a river runs its course within the banks that God has provided for it, it brings health and nutrition. It causes fruit trees to develop and to produce healthy fruit. But when those rivers overflow their banks, it leads to death and disease and destruction. The same is true of our lives. When our rivers are flowing within the banks that God has established for them, there is health and bounty and fruitfulness. But when they overrun the reaches that God has established for them, it leads to death and destruction. Now, we've already seen that true love true love is pure and true love perseveres. We're going to talk now in the second part of page 3 of your syllabus, if you're there with me. After we've already dealt with the patience of boundless love, the growth of boundless love through that mutual affirmation, mutual appreciation as we grow through the seasons of life, one for the other, not hardening or becoming calloused in our treatment of one another, but all the more appreciative of one another as they go back and forth in that DNA of love, culminating in the declaration as desire grows for their wedding day, and she says to her friends, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles of the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. There is a right time, a right place, and a right person. And that is where the purity of love also is experienced. True love grows through patience and affirmations of other-centered love. And that's where the life of Jesus comes into play in our marriages, as it's each for the other and both for God. Every day, less of me and more of Him. Now here's what we find when we come to chapter 2, verse 8. There's been an interlude as we look through these photo album snapshots of the story of love of the couple. We discover today that there has been a period of separation, which almost every relationship experiences to one degree or another. Those of you who have been deployed have experienced that to a great degree, others perhaps less. And so the couple has been separated for a period of time. That becomes obvious as we begin to read the passage in chapter 2, verse 8. Because all of a sudden, the beloved, Solomon, appears at her home in the northern part of Israel, near the border with Lebanon. And we discover in this passage the renewal, but also some threats to love. And we can extract from this passage many, many lessons for our lives. And so here's the new springtime. Springtime is the season of love. Universally, it seems, as the winter has passed, the ice has melted, the snow is gone, the crocuses begin to appear, the little flowers and the butterflies, and you just step outside and there's that freshness of springtime. And that is representing, in this passage, the springtime, the renewal of love after a period of separation. And so chapter 2, verses 8 and following. It says this, the voice of my beloved. And she says, behold, he comes. The word behold is the word look. So she's speaking to friends of hers, perhaps they're in her home in the northern part of Israel, near Lebanon. Their relationship will become a blessing to others around them, as every relationship should be, if it's truly an other-centered relationship. And so she calls her friends to the window to see. He's arrived. He's here. Behold, he comes. And she describes the beloved as though he were a calf who has recently been born, but has been locked up in the barn all winter long, and suddenly he's freed. And so she describes him as this newly released calf, or perhaps a doe, that is bounding over the hills from here and there, innocent, energetic. Behold, he comes, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, looking through the lattice. He can't wait to see her. Now, it's not as though he's a peeping Tom. That's not what she's saying. He's trying to get a glimpse of it. He's running from one side of the wall to the other that surrounds the courtyard to her home. He's trying to get a glimpse of her, let her know, I'm here, I'm here. The excitement of the newness, the freshness of their love. Verses 10 and following, my beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, get out of bed. Well, that's not exactly what he says, but arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away, for behold, the winter is past. And now he starts to give a list of evidences that springtime has come, and this represents their relationship. Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. For behold, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. He gives 7 descriptions of the springtime in their relationship. The rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing has come, the voice of the turtle dove is heard in the land, the migratory birds have returned, it's springtime. The fig tree ripens its figs, the vines are in blossom, they give forth fragrance. Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. For the second time he asks her to go on a date with him. And then it gets interesting. In verse 14, he describes her once again, 4 or 5 times in the book, he describes her as being a dove. I'm not sure if that's the best thing to call your wife, but I guess it works. And he calls her his dove. Remember, her eyes transmit peace and tranquility, but he describes her as this timid bird who is afraid to come out from her hiding place. And so he says, oh, my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crannies of the cliff, let me see your face. It's been a long time. I need to see you again. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. He describes her as this dove that is hiding in the clefts of the rock and timidly comes out and returns. And comes out and returns. She's afraid of something. The next verse will tell us what. But what we see in this passage is the importance of the renewal of springtime in their relationship. All of us go through periods of winter, of separation. And the lesson we learn is that true love requires true time, quality and quantity time together. All winter long, all he's thought about is being with her, of hearing her voice. It's interesting that in many relationships, that degenerates with the passing of time. He doesn't want to hear her voice anymore. He doesn't have patience to talk and to hear about how the day went. That sofa time that we talked about with our parenting group this morning in the workshop. That individual time when each one shuts its mouth and listens, truly listens to the heart of the other. A discipline, yes, but a delight for married couples who continue to experience the springtime of their love. It's interesting that 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, when it talks about the husband's responsibility in the relationship, says that we men are to dwell together with our wives in understanding way. We have a pastor in Brazil who promotes divorce because, after all, after 20 years of marriage, 15 years of marriage, 10 years of marriage, you're married to a different person because your wife changes. And if you don't understand or know her anymore, then just get another one and start over. That's ridiculous. Our challenge as men and as women is to study our spouse and to get to know him or her. Each passing year, it's a new person that you're getting to know. It's an adventure. Sure, there are storms, but the challenge is to know one another, to be with one another, and to renew the relationship with one another. Love longs to hear the voice of the beloved. Couples need to cultivate the habit of communicating at deeper and deeper levels of intimacy in a context of grace. I want you to look back in your Bible at Proverbs chapter 18, verse 2. It's a verse that's meaningful to me because it's oftentimes not what I do. We shared this morning about a practice that we learned years ago from a course that we took called Sofa Time, when the couple, as soon as the two of them are both at home together, have those first 10, 15 minutes while the kids are still awake and can see that mom and dad are having an opportunity to catch up on the events of the day. This verse often comes to my mind because oftentimes I just want to tell about what happened in my day, and then I'm moving out the door and my wife says, "Can I share with you what happened in my day?" Proverbs 18:2 says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." The renewal of the springtime of love requires that we truly listen and hear what the other has to say and not just our opinion. Love passes through stages which require reminders and renewal. What's so good about family camp, or perhaps a couples retreat that you've been involved in, or some of you that have the habit of a date night, is that it is an opportunity to renew our relationship and invest in that which is truly important in our lives, including the idea of sofa time that we already mentioned. So back to Song of Solomon, chapter 2. Not only is there a renewal of love in springtime, but there is a renewal of grace to love. In chapter 2, verse 15, we read the Shulamite saying this: "Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blood." We already saw some threats to love in the first chapter: the competition in the palace, the insecurity that she felt because she didn't achieve all of the standards of beauty of her society. But this is the real threat. After the renewal of love, the springtime of love, the reason why she, the dove, was so hesitant is because they're foxes. Little foxes, they don't seem so dangerous, but they're perilous to the marriage. Little foxes destroy the little flowers of their relationship that were blossoming again. And so she calls out for help, perhaps to her friends from the palace, perhaps the counselors. Please help us, Solomon and the Shulamite, to destroy these little foxes, little things that can creep unawares into our relationship and that can gradually destroy it. What are some little foxes that so easily penetrate into the love relationship of a husband and wife? Going back to the book of Genesis, chapter 3, we could say that masculine passivity, so common, represented in Adam, who failed to teach his wife correctly God's word, and so gave margin for the enemy to whisper in her ear, to take the leadership. Everything in Genesis chapter 3 indicates that Adam was there and present and hearing all that took place, and he wouldn't even lift a little finger to interfere to protect his wife from Satan's temptation. Female insubmission. The lack of respect on the part of the wife toward her husband. And so she'll take the lead and she'll trample him in order to get what she wants. And the little foxes eat away. Precocious intimacy. The guilt that often is associated. Selfishness and pride, which are the death to biblical marriage, which is other-centered and humble. Sexual isolation, using what God has created to be the glue that would bind the couple together, the celebration through sexual intimacy of their covenant pact. And then to use that as a means of getting back at your spouse. Little foxes. Apathy and indifference. We'll see tomorrow morning how that crept into their relationship soon after their honeymoon. We already talked about third-party interference, the internet, pornography, and our children. All of them can be little foxes. Some of them are good things. But when they become the principal thing, they become the wrong thing. And they drive a wedge. Little foxes that can destroy the springtime of our relationship. Threats. So what is the answer to problems like unresolved bitterness, anger, that is allowed to fester and grow? And we just sweep things under the carpet until, before we know it, there's like huge separation between us. The next verse is the answer. Look at Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 16. Oftentimes we isolate this verse as one of the choruses in the book from its context, but it's the actual context of this verse which give it meaning. How do we resolve the problem of little foxes? It's based on the renewal of our covenant, one with the other. Look what she says in 2:16. In the very context in which she calls out for help to catch the foxes, the little foxes, she says this: my beloved is mine, and I am his. That statement, which we often use to summarize the message of the book of Song of Solomon, is really a declaration of commitment and purity. She starts out by saying, he belongs to me, little foxes, and I belong to him, little foxes. We're not going to let anything come between us. I am Dave of Carol Sue. She is Carol Sue, who belongs to Dave. And so that declaration of covenant faithfulness, which reminds us of Genesis 2:24, for this reason shall a man leave all others, starting with the most intimate relationship he's ever had in his life with mom and dad, shall cling to his wife. The word that is used is actually used of what we could call the super glue of covenant faithfulness. It binds two people together inseparably. And the two shall become one flesh. That commitment till death do us part. A relationship in which separation and divorce don't even enter into our vocabulary, which was the counsel my wife and I received 36 or 37 years ago in our premarital counseling. You don't even play with the idea. You go into that room called marriage and you lock the only door that gets you out. And you resolve the problems. You run after those little foxes. You stamp on those little foxes based on your covenant commitment to faithfulness till the end. That glorifies the Father. Now, remember we shared that this refrain of exclusivity, which leads us to purity, there can be no other party entering into the covenant faithfulness of two in oneness. Remember I said that verse appears 3 times? Here's a curious thing, an amazing thing that happens in the book. The first time she says this, my beloved is mine, and I am his. Note that she emphasizes possession and then belonging. He is my possession, and I am his. I belong to him. And then she says, he grazes among the lilies. It brings the idea that he finds peace and comfort in our relationship. But I want you to look ahead to chapter 6, verse 3. The second time that she repeats this refrain, it's a little bit different. I want to see if you notice the difference here and can track through the book of Song of Solomon the growth of their love. Look at chapter 6, verse 3. It's also a context of conflict after there has been a problem, tension between the couple. And the resolution in chapter 6, verse 3, she says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. What changed? Do you notice the difference? She puts him first. Belonging is more important than possessing. As marriage has grown, in spite of and perhaps even because of the problems that they experience, theirs becomes a more other-centered relationship than it was when they were just engaged. But here's the amazing thing. Look ahead at chapter 7. Verse 10. As they have once again celebrated their oneness, at the end of that section in chapter 7, verse 10, she says this, I am my beloved's. And his desire is for me. And that's all. Now she says, what is important to me is that I belong to him. But so secure is she in their love, and so other-centered at this point, the true manifestation of Christ in us, that she completely forgets about herself. She doesn't even say, and he is mine. Because at this point in their relationship, it is enough to belong, that she does not even need to possess. That's the growth of love, as we see throughout the book. The exclusivity which leads to purity and covenant faithfulness. It's the message that culminates the book when she declares in chapter 8, verse 6, many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. So people, here's what we see. Faithfulness to our marital vows, in spite of little foxes which are always trying to devour our relationship, already constitutes a testimony that brings glory to God. In other words, if you have been married for 3 years in a faithful covenant commitment to your spouse, I am my beloved's and he or she is mine. You have been giving glory to God by your faithfulness for 3 years. If you've been married for 30 years in a covenant faithful relationship, in spite of and because of the hardships and difficulties that every relationship goes through, you have already had a ministry of glory to God. If you've been married for 49 years, most good, some maybe difficult, or 36 years, or 20, or 7, or 8, or 10, you two, both 10. That's great. You have been glorifying God by that faithfulness. Now here's something we need to remember. There are always little foxes. There are always storm clouds on the horizon. And we have a choice. We need to teach this to our young people, because so many today want to be like a palm tree planted in a shopping center, a mall. Now, that life looks nice, but it has no roots. We've been in shopping centers in Brazil that have palm trees planted in a planter, and they've got roots about this deep, and this big palm tree. It looks so peaceful and tranquil. But I wouldn't want to be a palm tree planted in a mall. There's no strength. There's no resistance. There's no fortitude. The first wind that ever would pass through that shopping mall is going to knock over all those palm trees. We have so many young people today that are getting married because they think it's going to make them happy, and they're going to have this wonderful time, and they've got companionship, and they've got legitimate sexuality and everything else. But what happens when the storms come? They need to know that the storms are coming. But in the storm, you don't just give in. You dig your roots deeper, and the roots of our lives intertwine to strengthen one another and to resist the hurricanes that come to the beach of our lives. That's a biblical marriage. We become stronger because of the storms, not in spite of the storms. And that's how love grows in the seasons of life. In verse 17, until the day, chapter 2, verse 17, breathes and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on cleft mountains. The word cleft mountains, this invitation, this expression of desire, is that the foxes would be overcome, the difficulties would be vanquished, and the desire is that they would once again be one in every sense. When she says that he would be as a young stag on mountains of separation, she's probably talking about their wedding day, and that they would have the opportunity of consummating once and for all their sexual relationship. But that leads to a second threat. It's not just the little foxes. But she talks again in chapter 3 about separation. Look at verses 1 through 4. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. On my bed by night, I sought him whom my soul loves. Now, people who see in this book a series of love songs intertwined that really don't have any progression. Imagine the couple already married at this point, and that is possible. But it seems more likely in the context of the new spring in their relationship that she's imagining another day of separation, and she doesn't want it. She doesn't want another deployment of her husband out to the flocks or out to Kuwait. She wants him to be with her. I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him but found him not. She doesn't want to go through another winter without him. I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves I sought him, but found him not. The watchman found me. As they went about in the city, have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed him when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go. She seeks to symbolize once again the way to overcome the threats to biblical marriage are through the renewal of covenant faithfulness. She would not let him go. And so she expresses her desire once again. Until I had brought him to my mother's house, the place of greatest security that she would have known till that time, to the chamber of her who conceived me. And it's at this point that once again she repeats the refrain of patience and purity. As her desire increases, and she does not want to let him go, but they're not married yet, she says to her friends, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. It's still not time, but the day is coming. And so 2 threats. After the passing of winter, little foxes and separation. Patience and purity, once again, are emphasized in the refrain. One of the ways we can illustrate this, especially with our young people, there is a time and a place for everything. The book of Ecclesiastes makes that clear. But there is a time and a place for us to enjoy the pleasures of matrimony, and there is a time and a place when our young people are not to enjoy the privileges reserved for those days. I think of, imagine the best restaurant you have ever been to in your life. In Brazil, we have what is called a churrascaria. You may have seen them in different places in the States around the world. They're all-you-can-eat meat restaurants. And when we're going to go to one of those to celebrate a birthday, they're really not that expensive, and they bring 20 or 30 different types of meat on spits, the way you want it, how you want it. You come in, and there's a salad bar that's got all sorts of frutos do mar, of seafood and salads. But then they start bringing the meats. Filet mignon, wrapped in bacon. All sorts of cuts that you can't even... We don't eat the entire day waiting for the chance to go to the churrascaria and celebrate a birthday or be with some members of our family. Now imagine, if you're in a restaurant like that, or perhaps an Outback, and they give you one of those little devices to put in your pocket to wait for your table because there's a whole line of people that are waiting to get there. Has anybody ever done that? You know what I'm talking about, right? And so you got a 45-minute wait, and so you're going to walk around and do some window shopping or whatever it might be. But you're hungry. And as you're out there walking around, you see a vendor who has popcorn to sell. Now, you don't know it, but that popcorn, the same popcorn, has been in that little push cart for 3 days. But you're hungry. And you don't resist. 40 minutes have passed. They still haven't called you. And so you buy yourself a big bag of popcorn. And you start stuffing yourself full of this old and stale and saltless popcorn. And when you're just about done, and you jump because you forgot. And it's your turn to go into the churrascaria. But it's too late. You spoiled your appetite. You ate too much of the wrong food at the wrong time, when God has reserved a banquet before you. That's what the scriptures teach. There's a time and a place. The more couples we have counseled after so many years of ministry, who are experiencing so many deep problems, especially in the area of their intimacy as a couple. And we discover so many of them were eating before the right time. And so I've developed a little formula that we share with young people. The more you eat before, the less after. The more you spoil the surprise before opening the present on your birthday, the less joy you have afterwards. We need to counsel our young people in days in which for them to continue as a virgin is so outdated, so obsolete, but we forget that that is the message of the Scriptures. There are seasons of maturing in love which require time together for renewal after the winter. All relationships go through periods of tension and danger which require grace and forgiveness. Commitment to the exclusivity of marriage vows is foundational to the marriage's survival. Isolation and loneliness must be overcome by the renewal of love. And that takes us, finally, to the wedding day. Chapter 3, verse 6 to 5, verse 1. We can summarize with these two words. At last, the day has arrived. The day that they have both been waiting for. I expect that you, imagine that you remember very well that day as I do. 35 years, 9 months, 14 days, 7 hours, and 37 minutes ago. I have no idea if that's right or not, but I in Spring Lake, New York, upstate New York, my wife and I exchanged our wedding vows. Every wedding is unique in some way. In our wedding, several members of the family wrote original songs that were sung at the wedding and were part of our celebration. I remember the wedding of our firstborn son 10 years ago, 12 years ago. 1,100 people went to that wedding. Our church is a big church. His, a pastor's family, hers, one of the leaders of our church. They were pastoring the young people of our church, so all of the teenagers, all of the college and career, all of the church went, especially because our daughter-in-law's mother does weddings for a living, and everybody wanted to eat whatever she had to offer at her young daughter's wedding. And then I remember the wedding of my daughter, that I had to hand over to a gorilla. And as we wept walking in, and as the fuses for all of the electrical system went out as the wedding began and paused everything, and our son's wedding on a golf course in Colorado, not 1,100 people, but 90 people, a small, quiet, but beautiful wedding ceremony. And then our other son on a farm in Pennsylvania. And the two families worked together to create this rustic atmosphere all week long, blending the families together, each one having its own specific, special moments. What I remember most about the marriage of our youngest daughter is that it hasn't happened yet, and I'm so glad for that fact. But it's coming, and another gorilla will enter into our family. Every wedding day is special in its own way, and that's what we find both in Genesis and in the Song of Solomon. In Genesis, the whole narrative of creation culminates in the wedding day of Adam and Eve. In the book of Song of Solomon, it's the exact center of the book. I shared that with you last night. 111 lines of Hebrew text before, 111 lines of Hebrew text after. The exact center of the book is the consummation of their wedding vows. So let's quickly just read through this passage. I'll make some comments of application for us, and we'll be done. Chapter 3, verse 6. What is that coming up from the wilderness? Like columns of smoke perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the fragrant powers of a merchant. She looks out from her window in the northern part of Lebanon. She's been waiting for this day for perhaps as much as a year. As was the custom in Jewish society, it is not the presence or the entrance of the bride, but the bridegroom that has always been the emphasis in Jewish weddings. The New Testament uses that parallel to describe the coming of Jesus. He says, behold, I go and prepare a place for you. The bridegroom leaves, and he comes at a time when the bride does not expect, does not know. She is to be ready always for him. She is to be pure, and she prepares herself and the things she needs for their wedding day. In a moment when she least expects it, the trumpets blow, the friends of the bridegroom accompany him, and that he comes to seek his bride, whisk her off her feet, and take her to his home to live forever. That story, which describes Jesus and the church, is illustrated in this passage. It's as though he has passed through the duty-free shop at the airport and bought all the perfumes he can afford, and there's this huge cloud of perfume which is accompanying the wedding procession. Who is it? Verse 7 answers the question. Behold, look. It is the litter. Litter here, not of little kittens that were just born. Litter describes a portable chair being carried by the wedding procession. It is the litter of Solomon. Around it are 60 mighty men. Wow! He's got a lot of brides. What do you call them? Groomsmen. Best men. 60 warriors. Some of the mighty men of Israel, all of them wearing swords and expert in war, each with his sword in his thigh against terrors by night. King Solomon made himself a carriage from the wood of Lebanon. He made its posts of silver, its back of gold, its seat of purple. Its interior was inlaid with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. The same ones who competed for his attention are now honoring both him and his bride. Go out, O daughters of Zion, and look upon King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, on the day of the gladness of his heart. The passage describes the arrival of the groom. The big day has finally come. He has spared no expense in preparing for their wedding day. But notice that the emphasis once again is on the way the husband protects the wife. The terrors of night he has foreseen. He travels in this great processional with 60 mighty warriors. The idea of these groomsmen are a protection of the bride. He who was the apple tree and provided shade and protection continues, guaranteeing that she will be saved. He has spared no expense. Sometimes we have a debate about how much we should spend on weddings and ceremonies, and if this ostentatious ceremony is necessary. And certainly there should be moderation in all of our families in light of the needs of the world, but there is a sense in which that day should be the grandest day. It is a coronation ceremony of a new king and a new queen, and that's what the text describes. How do we apply all that? Number one, love inspires our best for the other. He gave everything he had to make that the most special day of their lives. The couple's relationship should be a blessing for everyone around. As she calls her friend, look, it's he. The idea is that their relationship is not so exclusive that it becomes exclusivistic. It's not just the two of them enmeshed one in the other, but their relationship is a blessing to all those around them. That is biblical, Christ-centered love. A husband's love requires that he protect his wife. That's so different than what Adam did in the garden. When he pointed his finger in the nose of his wife and exposed her to an instant death at the hands of Almighty God, when God has called men to protect their wives like Jesus protects the church. In the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul takes that idea and extends it to men when he says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. washing her with the water of the word, purifying her soul, shepherding the wife, treating her as you treat your own body, protecting it in every sense. What Jesus did for the church is the opposite of what Adam did to Eve. But the lesson for us is clear. In Christ, we men can be the Adam that Adam never was. In Christ, the wife can be the Eve that Eve never was. That renewal takes place because of the work of Jesus. Someone has said it this way: a sad wife is the greatest chain for her husband. Now, there are exceptions, obviously. Postpartum depression, chemical imbalance, that time of month. But normally, the husband's responsibility from the first year of marriage on is to ensure the happiness of his wife. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 24, the regulation for ancient Israel was that the first year of marriage should be a special year in which the husband would dedicate himself. He would not take on any extra responsibilities in the community. He would not even go out to war, because the purpose was to stay at home and adapt to his wife and promote her happiness, the text says, perhaps including raising up children to guarantee their inheritance. That is the husband's responsibility. It is a tragedy when the one who should protect his wife is the very one who abuses her, physically, verbally, emotionally, or sexually. Men, God has called us to be the protectors of our wives. Anything that harms her, words that cut her, emotional abuse, isolation, forcing her into sexual activities that are repulsive to her. All of those are forms of abuse when God has called us to be the principal protectors of our wives. Solomon did that to the point of hiring 60 valiant men to conquer the terrors of the night. And that leads us to the last portion of preparation for the wedding itself. Chapter 4, verses 1 to the climax at the end of the chapter. The focus here is on the consummation of the marriage, when sacred vows are sealed, and not so much on the ceremony itself. At this point, Solomon, who has spoken very little in the entire book, he now takes the lead. Look what he says in verses 1 through 7 of chapter 4. He speaks, and he says to her, "Behold, you are beautiful, my love." The fourth time he has said it. "Behold, you are beautiful," number 5. And he begins to describe her once again as he conquers her insecurities leading up to their wedding night. He describes her both in terms of physical as well as character beauty. And he starts from the top down. He says, "Your eyes are doves." 5 times in the book he describes her as a dove behind your veil. "Your hair is like a flock of goats." Now, I don't recommend that you use all of these descriptions. It may not work. "Your hair is like a flock of goats leaping down the slopes of Gilead." What he's saying is it's hypnotic. As he looks out onto the hills in the nearby vicinity, and he sees those black-haired sheep coming off, or goats coming off of the mountaintop, and their flowing locks, he describes her as hypnotic trances. He was hypnotized by her beauty. The third declaration, he has 7 describing the perfection of her beauty. He says this. Now, this is one of the more curious of all. He says, "Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes," shorn sheep, "that have come up from the washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost its young." What is he saying? She's got all of her teeth, and they're beautiful white. And they're matching. But there's more to it. When he says that they're like sheep that have been shorn, he describes her teeth and the joy that her mouth brings, the laughter that they elicit, those teeth, because he describes them as sheep recently shorn. Now, think about the dog. Your pet, when you give him or her a bath. What inevitably happens when you're finished past putting all of the shampoo on and spraying down your dog? What do? You put down the hose and you run. Why do you run? Because your dog is going to do that. And the water's going to spray all over. And it's funny. That's what the sheep do. And when he sees her, she makes him laugh. She brings joy to him. It's not just that she has perfect teeth, but just the sight of her brings a smile to his face. Verse 3. Your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Probably describing what comes from her mouth, the words that pour forth grace. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate, bright and rosy behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David. No, she's not a giraffe. Built in rows of stone. On it hang 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. She is noble. There's dignity in the way she carries herself. It's external and internal beauty. And then he says, your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle that graze among the lilies. This is in preparation now. This is their wedding night. And he describes his desire to caress her breast. It's not the form of her breast like two fawns. That would be weird. But it's what those little baby fawns make him want to do. And then he says, until the day breathes and the shadows flee, it's the only time in the entire passage he refers to himself in the first person. Everything is focused on her. He is totally consumed by her beauty and her character. That is the other-centered nature of love. It's what she will express in the course of their relationship when she forgets herself. I am my beloved's. He says, I will go away to the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense. He describes her beauty. Verse 7. You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. Really? No flaw? Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. She's already described herself in less than flattering terms. I'm just a crocus. But in his eyes, she's everything. And now he invites her to forget the dangers that lurk, her insecurities, and lose herself in his love. Look at verse 8. Come with me from Lebanon, that was her home, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Depart from the peak of Amana, depart from the peak of Sinir and Hermon, from the dens of lions, from the mountains of leopards. What is she doing in the dens of lions and the mountains of leopards? I thought she'd already come from Lebanon. I thought she joined the wedding procession and had gone to Jerusalem. What is he talking about, leopards and lions? She's with him. It's their wedding day. But she has fears. She's remembering the dangers. She's remembering her home. And after he praises her beauty, he calls her back. Not just her body, but her being. To truly lose herself in his love. True love waits for the right moment to be consummated, and it is worth the wait. There comes a time when husbands must affirm their love and appreciation for the beauty and character of their wife. Not just flattery, but honest, sincere appreciation and praise for the way God has gifted her and made her just for you. It's hard for men to verbalize, but it's important, and women need to hear. The focus of each one of them is the other. Christ-centeredness manifests itself in other-centeredness. He only mentions himself one time in the entire text. There's no reason for that kind of love to grow cold. Here's something I want you to see. We're going to see tomorrow morning. In this special moment in their relationship, he lists 7 characteristics from top to bottom that he appreciates in her. After their first fight, and after the extension of forgiveness, when they come together again and he repeats his little discourse, he lists 10 characteristics that he loves about her. 7 on their wedding night, but 10 after their first fight. What do we learn from that? Not only in spite of, but perhaps because of the difficulties and tension in a sin-scarred world, our love can actually grow. In the storms of life, our roots can grow deeper and we can become better and closer, not just in spite of, but because of the hardships and difficulties we've gone through. Your marriage is stronger today because of some of the things you have gone through. And God has been more glorified in your life in the desert and the storms than if you were a palm tree planted in a shopping mall. Does that make sense? We can use the hard times to strengthen and deepen our relationship. And so now at the end of the chapter, he praises her beauty once again, and he thanks her that she has saved herself for him. Look at verses 9 through 11. You have captivated my heart, my sister, my bride. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. I just see one little pearl earring, and I go nuts. I melt before you. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. This idea of sister seems a little strange to us, but that was the most endearing term, the closest that a man and a woman could be in that society apart from marriage. How much better is your love than wine? Remember that she said that about him in chapter 1, verse 2? And the fragrance of your oils than any spice, that was also stated earlier. Your lips drip nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. He's saying, you are the promised land for me. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. You bring refreshment to my soul. And then he thanks her for the most precious gift that she could have given him on their wedding night. She has saved herself totally for him. In days in which so many are drinking salt water, polluted water, giving themselves before the hour. If nothing else, we need to teach our young people the importance of saving themselves for this moment. A garden lot is my sister, my bride. A spring lot, the fountain sealed. Your shoots are an orchard of pomegranates with all choicest fruits. Henna with nard. Nard, and now he starts going through the duty-free shop again. All of the perfumes he can name in their society. Nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh, and aloes, with all choice spices. A garden fountain, a well of living water, and flowing streams from Lebanon. He describes her as being this tsunami of joy and pleasure, and it's all for him. That reminds us of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 5 describes sexual delight in the relationship of husband and wife as though it were springs that could satisfy an army of men. And he praises his wife because she's only for him, and vice versa. Each for the other, both for God. And he describes it in growing images of waters and fountains and oceans. And she has saved it all. And so now we come to the exact center of the book. Not all of our Bibles identify the speaker in verse 16, but it seems to be the wife, the woman. And she now invites him, conquered by his words, by his love. And she calls out to the north wind, "Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind, that bring refreshing coolness near. Blow upon my garden, let its spices flow. Let my beloved come." And now she changes to his garden. It's now that she finally has delivered herself to him and eat its choicest fruit. The wedding night has arrived. She offers him her love. He accepts. Chapter 5, verse 1, "I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gathered my myrrh with my spice. I ate my honeycomb with my honey. I drank my wine with my milk." The two have become one. He describes once again as though she were the promised land, and she is for him. The joys and the pleasure that God has associated with the moment when their wedding vows are consummated and two become one physically, joining their souls one to another. God, the creator of sexuality, has designed that very moment to be repeated over and over and over again throughout an entire marriage. Not like that NBA basketball star who prides himself for having gone to bed with 1,000 different women and doesn't know the slightest thing about true biblical sexuality. Because he has never experienced the profound, soul-altering joys of two people in unconditional commitment who continually give themselves one to another, even when they have all the munition, everything they can use to hurt the other, and they refuse to do so. And that person who knows all of your faults and all of your defects unselfishly delivers herself or himself to you for your pleasure, for your delight, in a never-ending, repetitive celebration of covenant unity. Only God could create something as incredible as human sexuality and associate it with the moment when the two become one and reflect his glory and the unconditional, unselfish love of Jesus for the church, and bless that moment in such a way that we would repeat it and desire it and declare his glory every single time when it's done his way in covenant faith. That's why a mysterious voice penetrates the darkness with these words. Chapter 5, verse 1. "Eat, friends, drink, and be drunk with love." Some Bibles have the women of Jerusalem or the winds stating these words, but that makes no sense at all in the privacy of the wedding night. It can only be the voice of God hovering over the couple and saying, "Yes, I created you for this." Enjoy the blessing of your God. The gift of purity is priceless. Parents must be the guardians of their children's hearts. Even if we didn't do it right, we can get it right with our kids. God is the Father of pleasure. The marriage bed is honorable, Hebrews 13:4 says. The gratitude which characterizes the relationship of these two should characterize our marriages. Every human marriage points to the final marriage, the wedding feast of the Lamb, when the shadow will become reality. the lesson we learned from this chapter. God reserves His greatest marital pleasure for those who wait for His perfect time. Patience and purity. Tomorrow, we're going to do an overview of the last part of the book, but in some sense, it's the most realistic and probably the part that will most speak to each one of us. Hardly had the honeymoon passed, but the routine anesthetized the romantic. How the couple is going to deal with rejection and respond in forgiveness is the message of the second part of the last part of the book. Because true love perseveres. But that's for tomorrow.